Today I will be reading chapter 6 in the third book of the series, and it is the book called Nicolae. Some call it Nicolae. I call it Nicolae, and I'm going to be reading chapter 6 today, and I will begin to read now. Buck sat bleary-eyed at the breakfast table, his ears stinging and his rib cage tender. Only he and Loretta were up. She was heading to the church office after having been assured she would not have to handle the arrangements for Bruce's body or for the memorial service, which would be part of Sunday morning's agenda. Well, Verna Lee was asleep in a small bedroom in the finished basement. It feels so good to have people in this place again. It feels so good to have people in this place again, Loretta said. Y'all can stay as long as you need to or want to. We're grateful, Buck said. Amanda may sleep till noon, but then she'll get right on those arrangements with the coroner's office. Chloe didn't sleep much with that ankle cast. She's dead to the world now, though, so I expect her to sleep a long time. Buck had used the dining room table to put back in order all the pages from Bruce's transcripts that had been strewn throughout the back of the Range Rover. He had a huge job ahead of him, checking the text and determining what would be best for reproduction and distribution. He set the stacks to one side and laid out the 5 deluxe universal sat phones Chloe had bought. Fortunately, they had been packed in spongy foam and had survived her accident. He had told her not to scrimp, and she certainly hadn't. He didn't even want to guess the total price, but these phones had everything, including the ability to take calls anywhere in the world. After Loretta left for the church, Buck rummaged for batteries, then quickly taught himself the basics from the instruction manual and tried his first phone call. For once, he was glad he had always been manic about hanging on to old phone numbers. Deep in his wallet was just the one he needed. Ken Ritz, a former commercial pilot and now owner of his own jet charter service, had bailed out Buck before. He was the one who had flown Buck from a tiny airstrip in Waukegan, Illinois, to New York the day after the vanishings. I know you're busy, Mr. Ritz, and probably don't need my business, Buck said. But you also know I'm on a big, fat expense account and can pay more than anyone else. I'm down to one jet, Ritz said. It's at Pewaukee, and right now, both it and I are available. I'm charging $2 a mile and $1,000 a day for downtime. Where do you want to go? Israel, Buck said, and I have to be back here by Saturday night at the latest. Jet lag city, Ritz said. It's best to fly that way early evening and land there the next day. Meet me at Pewaukee at 7 and we've got a deal. Rayford had finally fallen off to sleep for real, snoring, according to McCollum, for several hours. Rayford had finally fallen off to sleep, snoring, according to McCollum, for several hours. About an hour outside Baghdad, Leon Fortunato entered the cockpit and knelt next to Rayford. We're not entirely sure of security in New Babylon, he said. No one expects us to land in Baghdad. Let's keep maintaining with the New Babylon tower that we're on our way directly there. When we pick up our other 3 ambassadors, we may just stay on the ground for a few hours until our security forces have had a chance to clear New Babylon. Will that affect your meetings? Rayford said, trying to sound casual. I don't see how it concerns you one way or the other. We can easily meet on the plane while it is being refueled. You can keep the air conditioning on, right? Sure, Rayford said, trying to think quickly. There's still a lot I'd like to teach myself about this craft. I'll stay in the cockpit or in my quarters and keep out of your way. See that you do. Buck checked in with Donnie Moore, who said he had found some incredible deals on individual components and was putting together the 5 mega laptops himself. That'll save you a little money, he said. Just a little over 20,000 a piece, I figure. Have these when I get back from a trip on Sunday? Guaranteed, sir. Buck told key people at Global Community Weekly his new satellite phone number and asked that they keep it confidential except from Carpathia, Planck, and Rosenzweig. Buck carefully packed his one big leather shoulder bag and spent the rest of the day working on Bruce's transcripts and trying to reach Rosenzweig. The old man had seemed to be trying to tell him, not in so many words, that he knew Dr. Ben Judah was alive and safe somewhere. He just hoped Rosenzweig had followed his advice and was keeping Carpathia out of the picture. Buck had no idea where Ben Judah might be hiding out, but if Rosenzweig knew, Buck wanted to talk with him before he and Ken Ritz hit the ground at Van Gogh Airport. How long, he wondered, before he and his loved ones would be hiding out in the shelter under the church? Security was tight at Baghdad. Rayford had been instructed not to communicate with the tower there so as not to allow enemy aircraft to know where they were. Rayford was convinced that the retaliatory strikes by global community forces in London and Cairo, not to mention North America, would have kept all but suicidal out of Iraq. However, he did what he was told. Leon Fortunato communicated by phone with both Baghdad and New Babylon towers. Rayford phoned ahead to be sure there was a place he and McCullum could stretch their legs and relax inside the terminal. Despite his years of flying, there came certain points, even for him, when he became claustrophobic aboard a plane. A ring of heavily armed GC soldiers surrounded the plane as it slowly rode to a stop at the most secure end of the Baghdad terminal. The 6-member crew of stewards and flight attendants were the first to get off. Fortunato waited until Rayford and McCullum had run through their post-flight check. He got off with them. Captain Steele, he said, I will be bringing the other 3 ambassadors back on board within the hour. And when will you have to leave for New Babylon? Probably not for another 4 hours or so. International aviation rules prohibit me from flying again for 24 hours. Nonsense, Fortunato said. How do you feel? Exhausted. Nevertheless, you're the only one qualified to fly this plane, and you'll be flying it when we say you'll be flying it. So international aviation rules go out the window? Steele, you know that international rules on everything are embodied in the man sitting on that plane. When he wants to go to New Babylon, you'll fly him to New Babylon. Understood? And if I refuse, don't be silly. Let me remind you, Leon, that once I've gotten a break, I'll want to be on that plane, familiarizing myself with all its details. Yeah, I know. Just stay out of our way. And I would appreciate it if you would refer to me as Mr. Fortunato. That means a lot to you, does it, Leon? Don't push me, Steele. As they entered the terminal, Rayford said, as I am the only one who can fly that plane, I would appreciate it if you would call me Captain Steele. Late in the afternoon, Chicago time, Buck broke from the fascinating reading of Bruce Barnes' writing and finally got through to Chaim Rosenzweig. Cameron, I have finally talked live with our mutual friend. Let us not mention his name on the phone. He did not speak to me long. But he sounded so empty and hollow that it moved me to my very soul. It was a strange message, Cameron. He simply said that you would know whom to talk with about his whereabouts. That I would know? That's what he said, Cameron, that you would know. Do you suppose he means North Carolina? Or NC? No, Chaim, I'm still praying. You're keeping him out of this. I am, Cameron, but it is not easy. Who else can intercede for the life of my friend? I am fanatic. That's the worst will happen. I will feel responsible. I'm coming there. Can you arrange a car for me? Our mutual friend's car and driver are available, but dare I trust him? Do you think he had anything to do with the trouble? I should think he had more to do with getting our friend to safety. Then he is probably in danger, Buck said. Oh, I hope not, Rosenzweig said. Anyway, I will meet you at the airport myself. Somehow we will get you where you need to go. Can I arrange a room for you somewhere? You know where I've always stayed, Buck said, but I think I'd better stay somewhere else this time. Very well, Cameron. That's a nice hotel. There's a nice hotel within driving distance of your usual, and I am known there. Rayford stretched and stood watching the cable news network, Global Community Network, television broadcast originating in Atlanta and beamed throughout the world. It was clear Carpathia had completely affected his will and spin onto new directors at every venue. While the stories carried the horrifying pictures of war, bloodshed, injury, and death, each also spoke glowingly of the swift and decisive action of the potent in responding to the crisis and crushing the rebellion. Water supplies had been contaminated, power was out in many areas, millions were instantly homeless. Brayford noticed activity outside the terminal. A dolly carrying television equipment, including a camera, were wheeled toward the Condor 216. Soon enough, CNN GCN announced the impending live television broadcast from potent Carpathia at an unknown location. Rayford shook his head and went to a desk in the corner where he found stationery from a Middle Eastern airline and began composing a letter to Earl Halliday's wife. Logic told Rayford he should not feel responsible. Apparently, Halliday had been cooperating with Carpathia and his people on the Condor 216 long before Rayford was even aware of it. However, there would be no way Mrs. Halliday would know or understand anything except that it appeared Rayford had led his old friend and boss directly to his death. Rayford didn't even know yet how Earl had been killed. Perhaps everyone on his flight to Glenview had perished. All he knew was that the dead had been gone, and Earl Halliday was no more. As he sat trying to compose a letter with words that could never be right, he felt a huge dark cloud of depression begin to settle on him. He missed his wife, he missed his daughter, he grieved over his pastor, he mourned the loss of friends and acquaintances new and old. How had it come to this? Rayford knew he was not responsible for what Nicolae Carpathia melted out against his enemies. The terrible dark judgment on the earth rendered by this evil man would not stop if Rayford merely quit his job. Hundreds of pilots could fly this plane. He himself had learned in half an hour. He didn't need the job, didn't want the job, didn't ask for the job. Somehow he knew God had placed him there. For what? Was this surprising bugging of the intercom system by Earl Halliday a gift directly from God that allowed Rayford to somehow protect a few from the wrath of Carpathia? Already he believed it had saved his daughter and son-in-law from certain death in the Chicago bombings, and now, as he looked at television reports from America's West Coast, he wished there had been something he could have done to have warned people in San Francisco and Los Angeles of their impending doom. He was fighting an uphill battle, and in himself he didn't have the strength to carry on. He finished the brief note of condolence and regret to Mrs. Halliday, lowered his head to his arms on the desk, felt a lump in his throat, but was unable to produce tears. He knew he could cry 24 hours a day from now until the end of the tribulation, when his pastor had promised that Christ would return yet again in what Bruce had called the glorious appearing. How he longed for that day! Would he and his loved ones survive to see it, or would they be tribulation martyrs, as Bruce had been? At times like this, Rayford wished for some quick, painless death that would take him directly to heaven to be with Christ. It was selfish, he knew. He wouldn't really want to leave those he loved and who loved him, but the prospect of 5 more years of this was nearly unbearable. And now came a brief address from Global Community potent Nicolae Carpathia. Rayford knew he was sitting within 200 feet of the man, and yet he watched it on television, as did millions of others across the globe. It was nearly time for Buck to head for Pulaski Airport. Verna Z was back at the Global Community Weekly office. with the new, to her, used car Buck had promised to buy her from the fleet of leftovers from New Hope. Loretta was at the church office, fielding the constant phone calls about Sunday's memorial service. Chloe hobbled around on a cane, needing crutches but unable to manage them with her sprained wrist in a sling. That left Amanda to take Buck to the airport. I want to ride along, Chloe said. Are you sure you're up to it, hon? Buck said. Chloe's voice was quavery. Buck, I hate to say it, but in this day and age, we never know when we might or might not ever see each other again. You're being a little maudlin, aren't you? He said. Buck, Amanda said in a scolding tone, you cater to her feelings now. I had to kiss my husband goodbye in front of the Antichrist. You think that gives me confidence about whether I'll ever see him again? Buck was properly chastised. Let's go, he said. He jogged out to the Range Rover and swung his bag into the back, returning quickly to help Chloe to the car. Amanda sat in the back seat and would drive Chloe home later. Buck was amazed that the built-in TV had survived Chloe's crash. He was not in a position to see it, but he listened as Amanda and Chloe watched. Nicolae Carpathia, in his usual overly humble manner, was holding forth. Make no mistake, my brothers and sisters, there will be many dark days ahead. It will take tremendous resources to begin the rebuilding process. But because of the generosity of the 7 loyal global regions and with the support of those citizens in the other 3 areas who were loyal to the global community and not to the insurrectionists, we are amassing the largest relief fund in the history of mankind. This will be administered to needy nations from New Babylon and the global community headquarters under my personal supervision. With the chaos that has resulted from this most sinister and unwise rebellion, local efforts to rebuild and care for the displaced will likely be thwarted by opportunists and looters. The relief effort carried out under the auspices of the global community will be handled in a swift and generous way that will allow as many loyal members of the global community as possible to return to their prosperous standard of living. Continue to resist naysayers and insurrectionists. Continue to support the global community. And remember that though I did not seek this position, I accept it with gravity and with resolve to pour out my life in service to the brotherhood and sisterhood of mankind. I appreciate your support as we set about to sacrificially stand by each other and pull ourselves out of this morass into a higher plane than any of us could reach without the help of the others. Buck shook his head. He sure tells them what they want to hear, doesn't he? Chloe and Amanda were silent. Rayford told First Officer McCollum to hang loose and be ready to depart from New Babylon whenever they were asked. He guessed it would be several hours yet, but at least stay available, Rayford told him. When Rayford boarded the plane to familiarize himself better with all the new whistles and bells, he went first to the pilot's quarters. Noticing that Carpathia and his aides were merely greeting and small-talking with the 7 loyal ambassadors of the global community. When Rayford moved from his quarters into the cockpit, he noticed Fortunato look up. He whispered something to Carpathia. Carpathia agreed, and the entire meeting was moved back 1 compartment in the middle of the aircraft. This will be more comfortable anyway, Carpathia was saying. There is a nice conference table in here. Rayford shut the cockpit door and locked it. He pulled out pre- and post-flight checklists and put them on a clipboard with the other blank sheets, just to make it look good in case someone knocked. He sat in his chair, applied his headphones, and hit the intercom button. The Middle Eastern ambassador was speaking. Dr. Rosenzweig sends his most heartfelt and loyal greetings to you, Potentate. There is an urgent personal matter he wants me to share with you. Is it confidential? Carpathia said. I don't believe so, sir. It concerns Rabbi Ben Judah, the scholar who has been creating such a furor with his controversial message. One and the same, the Middle Eastern ambassador said. Apparently his wife and 2 stepchildren have been murdered by zealots, and Dr. Ben Judah himself is in hiding somewhere. He should have expected no better, Nicolae said. Rayford shuddered, as he always did when Carpathia's voice waxed grave. I couldn't agree with you more, Potent, the ambassador said. I can't believe these zealots let him slipped through their fingers. So what does Rosenzweig want from me? He wants you to intercede on Ben Judah's behalf. With whom? I suppose with the zealots, the ambassador said, bursting into laughter. Rayford recognized Carpathia's laughter as well, and soon the others joined in. Okay, gentlemen, calm down, Carpathia said. Perhaps what I should do is accede to Dr. Rosenzweig's request and speak directly with the head of the faction. I would give him my full blessing and support, and perhaps even supply him technology that would help him find his prey and eliminate him with dispatch. The ambassador responded, Seriously, Potent, how should I respond to Dr. Rosenzweig? Stall him for a while. Be hard to reach. Then tell him that you have not found the proper movement to raise the issue with me. After an appropriate lapse, tell him I have been too busy to pursue it. Finally, you can tell him that I've chosen to remain neutral on the subject. Very good, sir. But Carpathia was not neutral. He had just begun to warm to the subject. Rayford heard the squeak of a leather seat and imagined Carpathia leaning forward to speak earnestly to his karate of an international henchman. But let me tell you this, gentlemen, a person such as Dr. Ben Judah is much more dangerous to our cause than an old fool like Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig is a brilliant scientist, but he is not wise in the ways of the world. Ben Judah is more than a brilliant scholar. He has the ability to sway people, which would not be a bad thing if he served our cause. But he wants to fill his countrymen's mind with blather about the Messiah having already returned. How anyone can still insist on taking the Bible literally and interpreting its prophecies in that light is beyond me. But tens of thousands of converts and devotees have sprung up in Israel and around the world due to his preaching at Teddy Kolik Stadium and in other huge venues. People will believe anything, and when they do, they are dangerous. Ben Judah's time is short, and I will not stand in the way of his demise. Now let us get down to business. Rayford pulled up the top two sheets on his clipboard and began to take notes as Carpathia outlined immediate plans. We must act swiftly, he was saying. While the people are most vulnerable and open, they will look to the global community for help and aid, and we will give it to them. However, they will give it to us first. We had an enormous storehouse of income before the rebuilding of Babylon. We will need much more, to effect our plan of raising the level of third world countries so that the entire globe is on equal footing. I tell you, gentlemen, I was so excited and full of ideas last night that I could not sit down for our takeoff out of San Francisco. I was nearly thrown into the room from the forward cabin when we started down the runway. Here's what I was thinking about. You all have been doing a wonderful job of moving to the one world currency. Oliver, hush. We are close to a cashless society, which can help the global community administration. Upon your return to your respective areas, I would like you to announce simultaneously the initiation of a 10-cent tax on all electronic money transfers. When we get to the totally cashless system, you can imagine that every transaction will be electronic. I estimate that this will generate more than $1.5 trillion annually. I am also initiating a $1 per barrel tax on oil at the well, plus a 10-cent per gallon tax at the pump on gasoline. My economic advisors tell me this could net us more than $500 billion every year. You knew that the time would come for a tax to the global community on each area's gross national product. That time has come. While the insurrectionists from Egypt, Great Britain, and North America have been devastated militarily, they must also be disciplined with a 50-cent tax on their GNP. The rest of you will pay 30%. Now, do not give me those looks, gentlemen. You understand that everything you pay in will be returned to you in multiplied benefits. We are building a new global community. Pain is part of the process. The devastation and death of this war will blossom into a utopia unlike any the world has ever seen, and you will be in the forefront of it. Your countries and regions will benefit, and you personally most of all. Here is what else I have in mind. As you know, our intelligence sources quickly became convinced that the attack on New York had been planned by American militia under the clandestine leadership of President Fitzhugh. This only confirmed my earlier decision to virtually strip him of executive power. We now know that he was killed in our retaliatory attack on Washington, D.C., which we have been able to effectively lay at the feet of the insurrectionists. Those limited few who remained loyal to him will likely turn against the rebels and see what they were bumbling fools. As you know, the second largest pool of oil, second only to the one in Saudi Arabia, was discovered above the Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. During the state of this leadership vacuum in North America, the global community will appropriate the vast oil fields in Alaska, including that huge pool. Years ago, it was capped off to satisfy environmentalists. However, I have ordered teams of laborers into the region to install a series of 16-inch pipelines that will route that oil through Canada and to waterways where it could be barged to international trade centers. We already own the rights to oil in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and the rest of the Middle East. That gives us control of 2/3 of the world's oil supply. We will gradually but steadily raise the price of oil, which will further finance our plans to inject social services into underprivileged countries and make the world playing field equal for everyone. From oil alone, we should be able to profit at a rate of about $1 trillion per year. Sorry, I had to put out a candle that was on fire. I will soon be appointing leaders to replace the 3 ambassadors of the regions that turned against us. That will bring the global community administration back to its full complement of 10 regions. While you are now known as ambassadors to the global community, forthwith I will begin referring to you as sovereign heads of your own kingdoms. You will each continue to report directly to me. I will approve your budgets, receive your taxes, and give your block grants. Some will criticize this as making it appear that all nations and regions are dependent upon the global community for their income and thus assuring our control over the destiny of your people. You know better. You know that your loyalty will be rewarded and the world will be a better place in which to live, and that our destiny is a utopian society based on peace and brotherhood. I am sure you all agree that the world has had enough of an antagonistic press. Even I, who have no designs on personal gain and certainly only altruistic motives for humbly and unwilling accepting the heavy mantle of responsibility for world leadership, have been attacked and criticized by editorialists. The global community's ability to purchase all the major media outlets has virtually eliminated that. While we may have criticized for threatening freedom of speech or freedom of press, I believe the world can see that those unchecked freedoms led to excesses that stifled the ability and creativity of any leader. While they may once have been necessary to keep evil dictators from taking over when there is nothing to criticize, such oppositional editorialists are anachronistic, no longer needed. Rayford felt a tingle up his spine and nearly turned, convinced someone was standing right outside the cockpit door. Finally, the feeling became so foreboding and persuasive that he whipped off his headphones and stood, leaning to peek through the fish-eye peephole. No one was there. Was God trying to tell him something? He was reminded of the same sense of fear that had overcome him when Buck had told his terrifying story of sitting through a meeting where Carpathia had single-handedly hypnotized and brainwashed everyone in the room except Buck. Rayford sat back in his seat and put the headphones on. When he depressed the intercom button, it was as if he were hearing a new Carpathia. Nicolae spoke very softly, very earnestly, in a monotone. None of the flourishes and inflections that usually characterize his speech were evident. I want to tell you all something, and I want you to listen very carefully and understand fully. This same control that we now have over all media, we also need over industry and commerce. It is not necessary for us to buy our own all of it. That would be too obvious and too easily opposed. Ownership is not the issue, control is. Within the next few months, we shall all announce unanimously decisions allowing us to control business, education, healthcare, and even the way your individual kingdoms choose their leaders. The fact is, democracy and voting will be suspended. They are inefficient and not in the best interest of the people. Because of what we will provide people, they will quickly understand that this is correct. Each of you can go back to your subjects and honestly tell them that this was your idea. You raised it, you sought support of your colleagues and me for it, and you prevailed. I will publicly, reluctantly accede to your wishes, and we will all win. Rayford listened to a long silence, wondering if his bugging device was malfunctioning. He released and depressed it several times, finally deciding that no one was saying anything in the conference area. So this was the mind control Buck had witnessed firsthand. Finally, Leon Fortunato spoke up. Potent Carpathia, he began, I know I am merely your aide and not a member of this august body. However, may I make a suggestion? Why, yes, Leon, Carpathia said, seeming pleasantly surprised. You are in a significant position of trust and confidence, and we all value your input. I was just thinking, sir, Fortunato said, that you and your colleagues here might consider suspending popular voting as inefficient and not in the best interest of the people, at least temporarily. Oh, Mr. Fortunato, Carpathia said, I do not know. How do you feel people would respond to such a controversial proposal? The others seemed unable to keep from talking over each other. Rayford heard them all agreeing with Fortunato and urging Carpathia to consider this. One repeated Carpathia's statement about how much healthier the press was now that the global community owned it, and added the ownership of industry and commerce was not as necessary as ownership of the press, as long as it was Carpathia controlled and global community led. Thank you very much for your input, gentlemen. It has been most stimulating and inspiring. I will take all these matters to heart and let you know soon of their disposition and implementation. The meeting lasted another couple of hours and consisted mostly of Carpathia's so-called kings parroting back to him everything he had assured them that they would find brilliant when they thought about it. Each seemed to raise these as new and fresh ideas. Not only had Carpathia just mentioned them, but often the ambassadors would repeat each other's as if not having heard. Now, gentlemen, Carpathia concluded, in a few hours we will be in New Babylon, and I will soon appoint 3 new ambassador rulers. I want you to be aware of the inevitable. We cannot pretend that the world as we know it has been almost destroyed by this outbreak of global war. It is not over yet. There will be more skirmishes. There will be more superintendents' attacks. We will have to reluctantly access our power base of weaponry, which you all know I am loath to do, and many more thousands of lives will be lost in addition to the hundreds of thousands already been taken. In spite of all our best efforts and the wonderful ideas you have shared with me today, we must face the fact that for a long time we will be fighting an uphill battle. Opportunists always come to the fore at a time such as this. Those who would oppose us will take advantage of the impossibility of our peacekeeping forces to be everywhere at once, and this will result in famine, poverty, and disease. In one way, there is a positive side to this. Due to the incredible cost of rebuilding, the fewer people we must feed and whose standard of living we must raise, the more quickly and economically we can do this. As the population level decreases and then stabilizes, it will be important for us to be sure that it does not then explode again too quickly. With proper legislation regarding abortion, assisted suicide, and the reduction of expensive care for the defective and handicapped, we should be able to get a handle on worldwide population control. All Rayford could do was pray. Lord, he said suddenly, I wish I was a more willing servant. Is there no other role for me? Could I not be used in some sort of active opposition or judgment against this evil one? I can only trust in your purpose. Keep my loved ones safe until we see you in all your glory. I know you have long since forgiven me for my years of disbelief and indifference, but still it weighs heavily on me. Thank you for helping me find the truth. Thank you for Bruce Barnes, and thank you for being with us as we fight this ultimate battle. And that's the end of chapter 6. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day. Next, we'll be reading chapter 7, and you're free to go.